Compelling stories are not hard to find. You just need to know where to look. Join your host, Dr. Eric Shaw, prosecutor Ryan Frank, writer Adrienne Bonenberger, and comedian Ryan Connor as they interview ordinary people about their extraordinary experiences. This is Baggage.
Hey everybody, welcome to Baggage. I am Ryan Frank, and on this episode, it's going to be Ryan Connor and Eric Shaw joining me as host. And very excited about this episode because we have with us Marissa Merola, who is the principal consultant and founder of Starling Enterprise, LLC in the private sector, as well as Adrienne Malin, who is the founder of the Human Behavioral Analysis Group, LLC, also in the private sector. But that's their current employment. The reason they're on this show, you probably figured it out from the title, is that they both recently were with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. So, ladies, thank you very much for joining us this episode. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So, if anybody does not know, the Behavioral Analysis Unit has been, given the Hollywood treatment in shows like Criminal Minds. And also Netflix had the series Mindhunter, and what else? Oh, Silence of the Lambs. That's all FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. I'm sure it's not quite like the movies and TV, but if you could, one of you ladies, please tell us briefly, what is the Behavioral Analysis Unit of the FBI? What does it do?
Sure. So it's funny that I'm answering this because I was actually an ATF agent. So Adrienne will probably have to jump in and correct me at some point. But the FBI BAU is essentially the unit within the FBI's Critical Incident Response Group that handles crimes that are serial in nature, violent, or really sort of what we would consider outside the bell curve. So cases that local and state law enforcement or our federal or international partners have difficulty in solving that have rich behavioral information associated with it. Crime scene behaviors, offender behavior, victimology, things along those lines, come to the FBI's BAU. Adrienne, you want to clean that up a bit?
No, I would say the only other additional information that might be helpful is, as you mentioned, when it's Hollywood is added as a layer over the Behavioral Analysis Unit, it looks a little different than reality. And in reality, it's actually multiple units broken down by discipline. So there's a unit dedicated to crimes against children, and there's a unit dedicated to crimes against adults, and so on. And a lot of that gets missed when you see it, on movies and television.
So, Melissa, let's go back to you for a second. You were an ATF agent. So how does an ATF agent end up becoming attached to the FBI's BAU?
Sure. So when the BAU first started back in early 1970s, it was called the Behavioral Science Unit, but a part of that was the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime, or NCAVC is what we used to call it. And when they were building that, they were really looking for it to be multidisciplinary. So back in the early 1970s, ATF joined primarily because we have expertise in cases that have a nexus to fire, cases that have a nexus to bombing. It's part of our training. It's part of the US code that we investigate. And so they included ATF in that initial NCAVC posture that they put together. And so ATF agents have been there since that point in time.
How long were you with the BAU?
So from December of 2014 to December of 2025.
Okay, pretty recently. And Adrienne, how about you? You I don't know about regular FBI agent. I don't know if there is such a thing, but you are started FBI Academy, have been FBI the whole time, correct?
That's correct.
How long were you with the FBI?
For a little over 20 years. I started back in 2002 and transferred. I was initially in the Los Angeles division, and then I transferred to the BAU in 2012. And then I actually retired. It's actually been three years ago this month, on May of 2023.
Okay. Is the BAU, if you're in the FBI, is the BAU kind of like a coveted thing? Do you really try to get that, or is it just another assignment?
I would say it's coveted, and I think for a couple of reasons. One, we really do, when you're an agent or an analyst in the BAU, you really do see kind of the most interesting cases around the world come into that unit. But then also the challenge is it only has several spots. So each unit, may only have 7 to 9, or depending on, again, the discipline, less than 10 spots available. And so it's actually very difficult to get there. So it takes some time. It's not like Silence of the Lambs where someone is assigned there straight out of the academy. You have to work in the field first. You need to gain that subject matter expertise so that you can bring that to the BAU. And in working it with others on that team, like Melissa mentioned, it's multidisciplinary. So we all have something to give that's a little bit unique.
What's the general procedure? Like we've seen the TV version of handwriting, like the Ted Kaczynski one. I thought was the most interesting one I've seen on TV, of the handwriting analysis and not just handwriting, but the linguistic analysis. What's the typical approach when something comes across your desk? Like, how do you start breaking it down? Yeah. Is there sort of a standard procedure?
I would say no, there's not a standard procedure, in large part because every case we get is a little bit different. So Adrienne was in the Crimes Against Children unit. I was in the Crimes Against Adult Victims unit. But to your point about Ted Kaczynski, both Adrienne and I were on their statement analysis group. So we certainly would have handled things along those lines, things along, 911 calls. But every case needs something different. So generally, we would get a lead from the field, and then materials would come into us, assuming it's not an exigent case. If it's an exigent case, obviously that's very different, and we would generally just get an oral briefing. But if it's case materials are available, those materials will come to us. We'll take a deep dive into them, and then we will have our consultation. Oftentimes before that, we would have kind of had a pre-call with whoever our state, local, or federal customer is to kind of say, give us the 30,000 foot view of what your case is. Tell us, what you think you need, and we'll maybe tell you where we think we can fit in. So sometimes it might be we're helping to link cases together. Sometimes it might be unknown offender characteristics, which is certainly what I think you primarily see in the media. But realistically, unknown offender characteristics is a very small percentage of what we would actually be doing. A lot of the times we would be doing interview strategies. We might be doing prosecutorial strategies. We might be doing case linkage. Adrienne can talk a little bit about if it was, a child abduction case, the types of things that they would be doing related to that. But every case is looked at separately through a different lens. And then whatever product we're going to put together is designed specifically for that case.
Can I ask a clarification there? Just talk about Hollywood versus reality. When the FBI gets involved or the BAU gets involved, do you guys take over? Because I always feel like in the movies, it's like, oh, the local sheriff gets pushed out and everyone's all butthurt and everything like that. Is this more of like a collaborative thing? Like you're kind of like adding resources to what they're doing, or do you guys kind of like take the lead? What does that look like?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked it to kind of clarify our role. Our role truly is a consultant. Like Melissa said, when the case comes in, we try to explain to them that, look, we're going to give you our opinions and our thoughts and our recommendations, but it's your case. If we're speaking to local state law enforcement or even another federal partner, it's your case. And we are just offering our suggestions based on the cases that we've seen, the research that we're aware of in this particular area, and the information that we've read in the case file. But it's the investigator's choice what they do. And I think, to Melissa's point about looking at all of the material, each case is going to be unique, particularly if you have victims of different ages and genders and things of that nature. But in terms of the types of material that we're always going to look at, we're always going to be wanting to see if there are crime scene photos. We're always going to want to know what type of evidence is available, whether that's digital evidence, forensic evidence, hairs, fibers, DNA, things of that nature, or, is there any information about the offender and victim's interaction? All of that stuff kind of comes together when we do the analysis. And as Melissa mentioned, when we're delivering our recommendations and our final product to them, we're referring back to all of those items that are present in the case.
You were in different units or in different sections, I guess, maybe is a better way to say it. But you had the opportunity to work on some cases together. Is that right?
Yeah. So over the years, we certainly would have worked a variety of cases together, even though Adrienne's expertise was in crimes against children, she still has wide operational experience and knowledge. And so there is a lot of kind of cross-pollination frequently between the units, because it's at our discretion when we put our team together who we work with. It doesn't necessarily have to be just somebody from the same unit. So, she would have been BAU 3, I would have been BAU 4. And even if I did not have a child victim, I still oftentimes would have, had a conversation with her or asked for her input and expertise. And then, like I mentioned, because we were both on the statement analysis group together, we would have worked any number of a variety cases together, regardless of what unit they were first referred to.
I see. Well, I want to ask about, we'll start off easy. No one dies on this one. I'll give that away. Sherri Papini. Can you tell us who Sherri Papini was, what that case was? And I think when you start talking about it, some people might come to their, refresh their memory in the media, this case.
Sure. So Sherri Papini went missing, let's say, in November, I want to say 2016, but I may have the year wrong.
I'm looking at the Wikipedia. It's November 2016.
November 2016. But she essentially or allegedly had gone out for a jog, and then her husband came home. She wasn't there. The kids hadn't been picked up for daycare. He used Find My iPhone and found her iPhone with her headphones and, nice little hair wrapped around the headphones near where their mailboxes had been, because mailboxes were not directly in front of the house. They were at the end of the street, and he reported her missing. She showed up a few weeks later on the side of the road by California Highway Patrol, responded and found her with branding on the back of her shoulder. She had restraints on, had lost a lot of weight, had additional injuries. And she told the story that she had been abducted by 2 Hispanic women and had been held against her will during that time frame.
And why did the FBI get involved? Because of the abduction aspect of it? When did law enforcement contact you guys?
So law enforcement contacted us pretty soon after her husband, Keith, reported her missing. And at that point in time, it was, hey, we think we have a kidnapping. So we got involved before Sherri showed back up in late November. And I think part of why law enforcement believed that she had been abducted is because about 8 or 9 months prior, in the same general area, Denise Huskins had gone missing. She was abducted from her boyfriend's house. She showed up 2 days later. Law enforcement at that time thought Denise and her boyfriend had made the story up. Turns out she was legitimately abducted. So I think contextually, they were a little concerned about, what was going on here, but we called it as a false allegation almost immediately.
Why is that?
In addition to the 911 call that seemed a little weird, and the sense of what her husband had said about how he had found, a piece of hair sort of nicely tied around her headphones, there were aspects of that investigation pretty early on that matched with research related to false allegation. So family and friends and other people who knew her who had come forward and said, she's got a bit of a histrionic personality. There were potentially some marital issues at play between Sherri and her husband, and just, a number of other reasons. But, we certainly caveated our discussion with law enforcement initially in the, hey, we believe that it is more likely that this is a false allegation than it is an abduction, because ultimately, abductions also generally are for sex. They're for money. They're for some specific reason. And we couldn't find a good reason. Once she showed up and was interviewed, we knew 100% we were right that was a false allegation. Unfortunately, it took years to come out, but we stood by our assessment.
Are false abductions that common that you're able to just be like, yeah, that's bullshit? Like, you can just tell?
So false abductions of adults, I would say, are different than false abductions of children. I would defer to Adrienne when it comes to cases where it's a false abduction of a child. False abductions of adults are certainly few and far between, although there has been research on it, but there were some pretty clear red flags that we were able to pick up on. One being, again, I'm not a clinician, I'm not diagnosing her, but she certainly has histrionic personality characteristics that were pretty obvious when we reviewed the interview.
If you can give specifics on some things about the histrionic behavior that would tip you off in that situation.
That's a big word for Ryan. You may want to define that.
Hold on, let me pull out my DSM-5 there for you. I guess the best way that I could... Oh, I see Adrienne jumping in. Adrienne, did you want to say something?
No, really, I was laughing.
I was going to say, because Adrienne thinks it's funny that I'm under the gun now. I would say my best way to sort of define a histrionic personality is I think of it oftentimes as how a petulant child acts sometimes when they don't get their own way. So very affective, acts out quite a bit, nothing is sort of ever going their way, and really tries to consistently have the spotlight be put on them. And so when we evaluated the interview of Sherri, once she was recovered or showed back up, however you want to put it, that interview of and in itself had some red flags for us. The way that she interacted with law enforcement, the responses to some of her questions just did not match up with the experience that we had. And so, again, this is part of why Adrienne and others from BAU3 were part of the overall team, is because BAU3 has handled a number of cases over the years of long-term abductions. When you think of Elizabeth Smart or other, victims along those lines, or survivors, I should say, who had been held captive for a long time period, certainly behaved differently than how Sherri did.
And I think the other thing too about it is, when we are looking at those sorts of cases, it's kind of a difficult scenario if you have law enforcement that has one theory of what has happened and we are seeing something a little bit different. But what we always try to do in any missing person case, whether it's an adult or a kid, but I would say particularly in children, since that's more of my experience, is we want to make sure that the investigators don't put all of their eggs in one basket, right? If they start the investigation thinking this is a real abduction of Sherri, and don't consider other alternatives, such as this is a false allegation, there's potential that they're going to lose evidence or continue down that biased path. And so we want to always make sure that they're considering all these options. And there were certainly a number of things that, as Melissa said, the word add up is probably not the best phrase to use, but it definitely to us did not seem how we would have expected things to have gone under the circumstances that she described.
This is so cool. I just see so much parallels between the way you guys look at this stuff versus how we look at stuff in medicine. And you're talking about not having what we call confirmation bias or premature closure, where you're still trying to gather all the information to develop your differential diagnosis, or for you, all these different options here. And it seems like you guys just come at it from such a scientific method. I think that's awesome.
It really is kind of a rule out, just like, we rule out different things based on the evidence that's available, or at least reprioritize the theory of what could have happened based off of the information that's coming in. And obviously it's flexible, right? I mean, if we're sitting around a table and we have, a set amount of information, but 2 hours later, law enforcement in the field calls us back and says, we just learned something else. Well, the shift may happen where we're like, okay, now we do feel like it's more of a false allegation versus the potential that it's a real abduction. And then, of course, the other thing that's kind of hard to navigate in all of that is when we have a surviving victim, how to handle that survivor, because no one wants to be the person that tells law enforcement, they're like, hey, we think that person that you believe has been abducted is not telling you the truth. Who wants to be the person that interrogates the potential victim, right? None of us are raising our hand for that job. So how can we carefully do that in a way that it's still trauma informed, we're still following best practices and policies, but also trying to get down to the real truth?
There's a guy in Colorado here that his wife disappeared and they found her remains a year or so later, and they brought charges against him, and then they just couldn't get enough evidence to get it together.
Suzanne Morphew.
Yep. And then he sued the prosecutor's office And then they did a little bit more digging, and they found that his wife had a game tranquilizer. Like it's so rare, and he was the only person within like a 2-state radius that had ordered it within the last year. And they were like, ruh-roh. So he's now he's awaiting trial.
I don't know. I can't tell you how many times people just get so overly confident, and they're just like, I was not looking at this case. I was not interested in like going further, but then you just push the issue like that guy. He's got to sue. I'm like, you.
Yeah.
Let sleeping dogs lie, man. You know?
Yeah. Good no body homicide case for sure.
And speaks to his personality, right?
Yeah,
if
just
he's
arrogant
enough to double down and sue the prosecutors.
Adrienne, I want to ask you about another no body homicide case. Before I do that, I want to ask about the going back to the Sherri Papini. The FBI it was years before she was prosecuted.
Correct.
Was the FBI involved the whole time?
They were. Yeah. Yeah. So we were involved in the initial few stages. And in addition to what we did in terms of interview strategies, we also sent one of the FBI's best CAFIs, so child adolescent forensic interviewers, who is now retired. We sent her out also to California to conduct an interview to, give us some additional assistance kind of from a mental health perspective. I think in the public side, the case probably went cold, but in the eyes of the FBI, absolutely not. They continued to investigate that, look at the various frauds. They tracked down which sort of Hobby Lobby store she had gone to buy she used like a wood burning tool that is what she had something sort of burned into her back. So they stayed strong and worked it the whole time. And then BAU got involved again to help with a prosecutorial strategy. And then also when it was time to arrest her, we provided assistance in terms of a approach and arrest strategy, because we did have some concerns about if she was going to be with her kids, we needed to sort of have a duty of care perspective related to that as well.
And I read here, I was reading up on her that she actually got like $30,000 in victim compensation fund. Like that's really...
Yep, she had to pay that back.
God.
Yeah.
Well, and then some. Looks like a $300,000 fine.
Yeah.
Or
what was her motivation? What were they trying to achieve with this?
My guess is Keith was probably going to leave her and was going to try to get custody of the kids. And so, when you've got those types of things going on, what else to do besides a over-the-top sort of reaction?
Oh, so the husband wasn't in on it at all. It was totally her?
He was not. It was all her. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, she called her former boyfriend and had him pick her up and whisk her away to a cabin in the woods.
Mm-hmm. Did anyone ask her after the fact how she thought that would make her get her kids back?
Look, she's an interesting person. I mean, either earlier this year or late last year, a few Dateline episodes and some other things come out. She's now back to, she did not do this.
Jeez.
Well,
whatever makes the news.
This sounds so much like that book and movie Gone Girl.
Correct. Yep. So that's what Denise Huskins was accused of, months prior to this. But certainly, Sherri was cute. She was young. She was blonde. They certainly made parallels to Gone Girl. Some evidence indicates that she had seen the movie and had read the book.
Well, according to Wikipedia, they stayed married for 7 years after this, which is
Jesus.
Yeah. The divorce is relatively recent. Yeah.
You want to strengthen your marriage, just fake your abduction, and that'll really bring you together.
Yeah. All kinds of things.
Can you guys tell us more about the Khaleesi Cuthriell?
Oh, yes. Khaleesi. Yeah.
It should go without saying that you are listening to a podcast called Baggage with two members of the FBI's BAU. This is a rough case. This one had I had emotions about learning about this case.
It is a heartbreaking story, and I would put it among the most difficult cases that I've ever put my hands on. And really, we were assisting the law enforcement agency that was investigating, who did a tremendous job to achieve justice for Khaleesi. But what happened was Khaleesi was in her mom's custody. Her mom had some challenges and fell victim to some issues that she was struggling with and ended up incarcerated. And right before she went to jail, she asked one of her friends, someone that she knew, to take custody of Khaleesi and watch her while she was in custody and take care of her. And so a woman named Candy Royer and her boyfriend, Travis Brown, agreed to take custody of Khaleesi and care for her while her mom was in custody. And initially, things were going okay. Her mom was able to do phone calls with Khaleesi and, hear her voice and talk to her and tell her stories. And Khaleesi would tell her mom stories. But eventually, she stopped getting the ability to contact her. So she would contact Candy and Travis and try to, make a phone call and speak with Khaleesi. And they would have all these reasons and excuses why Khaleesi was unavailable to talk, whether it's, she was at a birthday party or she's asleep and unavailable to talk. And so over time, Khaleesi's mom started to get concerned of what was going on. Why were these people keeping her from Khaleesi? And so she actually spoke to some correctional officers in the facility she was in who contacted the sheriff's office, and they interviewed her and started looking into where's Khaleesi. And Travis and Candy had all sorts of excuses and said that someone came to the house, as I recall, and took custody of Khaleesi and had all of these reasons why Khaleesi was no longer in their care. The problem is that once investigators started digging deeper and doing search warrants and things of that nature, the real truth was discovered, which was that Travis and Candy were abusing Khaleesi to the point of torture and doing some pretty horrific things to her. And ultimately that resulted in her death. And unfortunately, as you mentioned, it is a no-body homicide case that was successfully prosecuted. And the outcome was exactly what we'd hoped for, which is life in prison for both of them. But I think the passion that went into this case, and kind of collectively the investigators working together, they contacted us because they were trying to see if there was a way that they could interview Travis or Candy and get them to explain at least where Khaleesi's body was located. And while we never really got the true answer about that, it allowed us to kind of help frame the story in a way that when the court was hearing it, when decisions were being made, I think it just really helped kind of bring it to full circle, again, for justice for Khaleesi, because, again, a heartbreaking story. After I retired, I actually had the opportunity to go to the sentencing hearing. I kept in touch with the investigators. And so when Candy was sentenced, I got to go down and see that, which was, I think, closure for me as well, speaking of baggage, but a tremendous case and again, heartbreaking.
I think it was just in the news that he tried to either appeal or either way, they upheld the conviction. That's what it was. It was appealed and they upheld the conviction.
Yes. I think he has life plus 20 years in custody, if I recall.
And so that happened in Waynesboro, Virginia. And I know of the prosecutor involved in that. I don't know him personally, but man, just reading the opinion and reading about it, what a heck of a job. A no-body homicide, it's a very, very difficult. I've never done one. That's a very difficult case. And my first exposure to the facts was preparing for this episode, and I read the Court of Appeals opinion, probably the opinion Eric found, and that gave the facts of the case. And it's very unique in the way the court opinion's written, because normally court opinions, it's written by judges and it's very matter of fact, and this is the evidence, but the tone of it is like they were portraying these people as evil. It was really interesting how you could tell like there was emotion in the court opinion about how bad it was, because part of it was, correct me if I'm wrong, there was some videos that were recovered that they had filmed Khaleesi, the defendants, which just horrific videos that basically chronicled the torture timeline, and then they stopped because she's not alive anymore.
Yes. And you did. I mean, and that's, the sad thing. And really in any torture cases, that's what you see is, when there is that sort of digital evidence, you're seeing, the child is literally degrading and dying before someone's eyes as they continue on in this process. And so, unfortunately, there were some very disturbing videos that were taken. And those videos not only depicted Khaleesi, but there was, you could hear the voices of the offenders as well, which I think is probably what the judge also remembers when writing those opinions. It's hard to you cannot unsee something like that. They are visuals that I will never forget.
Sure, I never want to see, but a 3-year-old, to put a 3-year-old through what she went through is crazy, and the lack of closure. You have the sentence, but there's never going to be a body buried because you're just never going to find where she is. you know?
Yeah, they, I will say the sheriff's department there did, for a while, there was a memorial. I haven't been down there recently to see if it's still there. There was actually, a small, at that time, makeshift memorial outside the sheriff's department for Khaleesi. And, all of us that worked on the case have a challenge coin that still sits on my desk that has Khaleesi's face on it and her name and an angel. And so, you have that sort of closure, but at the same time, her mom's left without her beautiful little girl. And from the no body perspective, I think the kid no body cases are a bit easier in some ways than the adult because, it's kind of easy to show that a 3-year-old, they're not going to have a bank account. A 3-year-old's not going to have a social media account. So where else would the 3-year-old be but for deceased? Whereas when you have a scenario where it's an adult, it can be a little bit more difficult because adults can, on their own accord, disappear. 3-year-old kids don't.
We had a case in 2012, I think it was, when I was still in residency. This was in the Norfolk area. I don't know the full details about what the people did to these kids, but we know that they were being kept in basically dog cages and starved. And by the time, it was a brother and sister pair that came in, and they came into the PICU, and the boy did not survive and the girl did. But it was something that, it was so big in the area, and we had, reporters and stuff outside the hospital every day. And it just was something that was so upsetting and rippled through the entire hospital when something like that happened. And just what these things can do to the community when there is torture and neglect involved to that degree. It's just so upsetting.
Yeah. And a lot of times too, I think people inherently believe that women are maternal. I mean, Candy had her own daughter who was not tortured. And people believe that there's this maternal instinct that comes with childbirth or with when you're born a woman, all of a sudden you know how to be maternal and take care of a child. Candy was equally, in my opinion, if not, well, I would say equally responsible for the abuse that occurred with Khaleesi as Travis. And a lot of times I believe that people in the community do not anticipate that a woman could ever behave that way. And having seen multiple cases involving women and the videos of what they can do, I can assure you, women are equally as capable as men of causing that sort of harm.
Another thing I found interesting about that case is there was expert torture testimony, which you don't see very often, to have a medical expert testify about torture and what this kid would have gone through. I imagine it happens to be actually the same doctor that I was supposed to be in trial with today, but she was my expert, but the case ended up pleading, which is good because now I'm doing this. That is just really interesting how you would have had a medical doctor, I'm assuming going from the video, from what you could see in the video and testifying about that. You were not present for the trial, is that right?
I was not present for the trial. I was present for the beginning. There were actually a couple of experts initially involved in that case. There is there's an entire class of child abuse pediatricians out there, which Eric would know a lot about. And they are very helpful in those torture cases because, especially in a no body situation, we did have to go off of the videos and timeline them out. And the doctors were looking at the actual injuries as they progressed and then, kind of assessing what would have had to have occurred for the child to be physically in that state, which I think really does help the jurors understand the lack of care and intentional infliction of harm.
If anybody wants more information on that case, I just listened to a really good podcast I found, Misery Machine, and the host narrate the details of cases, and they did Khaleesi's case. And it's very victim-centric storytelling. It's very well done. So if anybody wants to search for Misery Machine and search for Khaleesi, you can find that episode. It's pretty good. All right, now a fun one.
All right. I was about to say this is kind of a bummer, huh? No, I'm just kidding.
This is one of those episodes.
Sorry, guys.
Welcome to our world.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. I'm just thinking, good God.
There's always a buzzkill when people ask what I did, and I said I work crimes against children. It immediately quiets the room. So,
did you ever have a stock lie that you would tell people on flights so that you didn't have to get into it?
Oh yeah, I was always a probation officer if I was on a flight.
There you go.
That's boring.
There
no one's asking about that.
Yeah.
I have good RBF, resting bitch face, so nobody's going to want to talk to me on a flight.
I'm going to see you saying "Oh no, I make balloon animals for children."
Yeah. No.
Well, you don't want to come off as a serial killer, Jesus.
Yeah, I know. Jesus
I was going to say
Christ.
that's an investigation in and of itself.
Yeah, exactly. I just do what John Wayne Gacy did.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, we've had this discussion before where, Eric and I were like, you're at a party, a social event with people not in your profession, and you start telling stories that you think are funny, and their eyes get really wide, like, oh, I see. I just said, talked about a violent crime, but no, get past that. This funny thing happened at trial. Like, yeah, we're still stuck on the violent crime that was committed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Adrienne and I can only hang out with each other.
Yeah. We've always said, like, fence us all in so that we can all kind of our own senior home as we get to that point, because we can all tell each other stories and we will all be able to tolerate them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your shop talk must be absolutely amazing.
Oh, it's it's something to behold.
So those are a couple cases where you're assisting local law enforcement. Are you ever asked to do anything internationally? Do other countries ask assistance from the BAU, or is it all United States stuff?
We definitely have done international cases. Both Adrienne and I have deployed internationally on a handful of cases. Adrienne probably more than me, but yeah, we definitely do international cases as well.
Oh, cool. I'm sure only crimes that happen in like Paris and London and like really fun.
I wish not.
Yeah, definitely not.
Adrienne and I deployed to Romania together. Not exactly on my bucket list of countries, but we had a good time.
What was the purpose of that? Why Romania?
Adrienne, do you want to tackle that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can give you some of the basics. It's been a while. I don't even remember what year it was, but essentially the Romanian, for lack of a better term, is the prosecuting attorneys for the Romanian government were looking for assistance because they were investigating and prosecuting a man named George Dinka, who had been charged with abducting and murdering two teenage girls. One was a minor, one was, I think, 18 or 19 years old, on two different occasions, and murdering both of them and then burning their remains. They wanted to get some more information from him in terms of an interview and learn a little bit more about him, I would say from a psychological perspective, and about his motivations and all of that. And so they reached out to the behavioral analysis unit. It came to our unit in BAU 3 because at least one of the kids, or one of the victims, was a minor, one of them being an adult, and then also it involving fire. My first thing to do was leave my office with the file and run to Melissa's office and say, hey, you want to work a case with me? It involves a foreign trip. Where are we going? Oh, we're going to Romania, which was great when we were in Bucharest. That part was wonderful. It was lovely. But when we were in this smaller town, it was interesting to say the least.
Okay. Look, the Romanian Travel Bureau is not a sponsor of this show. So feel free.
Fair enough.
Trash talk Romania, however you want to.
Yeah, we got no listeners in Bucharest.
We actually, Melissa and I joked that Bucharest was lovely, and we would look around and it's like, this is the land of beautiful people walking around Bucharest, and the food was delicious. It's just it doesn't help when the trip to the smaller town involves going to the place where a man murdered and burned two young girls. So, that puts a damper on the town generally.
My brother-in-law's had to spend a couple weeks over there back and forth with deployments recently for the Army. And he says it's just like the seventh circle of former Soviet bloc hell, just like everything you can imagine from the Eastern European, just poor, rundown, beat up kind of country.
Yeah. So that is certainly part of it. It is a little weird. We would get picked up from our hotel every morning in nice Porsches, big Mercedes. I mean, generally not what the government is picking you up and driving you places. And so, that was a little weird for us, but they also asked us to conduct an interview of the offender. Adrienne is quite tiny, and he is, I'm going to say 6'4", 6'6", maybe, I don't know, 275, 300, big guy, like, needless to say. And to Eric's point, we were essentially going into a Russian prison. And so they're just like, okay, there you two go interview him. And Adrienne, yeah, Adrienne's laughing.
I remember walking down. Imagine it's like there's a courtyard and there's a bunch of cinder block buildings with windows, very small windows with bars on them. And people are like reaching out, like cages looking out, and like you can hear them talking and whispering and making noises and things like that. And I remember when they closed the door, Melissa, we both looked at each other like, are we ever leaving here? And we even said to the legal attaché, we're like, is this actually a good idea? He goes, no, it's going to be fine. And he of course he's native Romanian, so he speaks the language and felt perfectly comfortable.
Yeah.
That is an experience I will never forget as well, because we interviewed him through the interpreter in the warden's office. And so to Melissa's point, with him being a very large man, when we sat down on the couch on the wall, which is where we were seated, because the interpreter was the Romanian agent was the one that was able to do the interview, the couch was really sunken. So like we literally sunk down. I felt like our butts were on the floor. So we probably even looked like these teeny tiny little people curled up on the couch. It was, I'm sure, entertaining for him too.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, we had to do a sweep of the warden's office because where Adrienne and I are like, he's going to kill us with a pencil. I mean, there's all these things that you're just not accustomed to. You walk into a U.S. prison and they're going to be in handcuffs. There's going to be, restraints on the wall, whatever it might be. No, he just walks right into the warden's office. No restraints, no handcuffs, no guards. Just is like, okay. And Adrienne and I are going, like, this is it. We've taken photos of where we are in the hopes that somebody can pull the metadata off of it and send, some Navy SEAL in to save us. So
yeah, we actually did send a message to our supervisors before when we were in the parking lot. I remember emailing, here is the address of the location we are. I will text you when we're out. If you don't hear from us in X amount of time, call the Legat office. We are going to need some more help.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Comparing Hollywood to reality, this sounds so much like that first season of Mindhunter when he's interviewing Ed Gaines, where he's just so...
Kemper.
Kemper.
Yeah,
Kemper, right.
I was thinking the exact same thing. Yeah.
Where he's just overwhelmed by the guy's size and just, is he safe and everything? This sounds very similar to that.
Oh, I mean, yeah, there were a lot of times where Adrienne and I were certainly questioning whether or not we were making the best decisions. But, the other part of it, like you're in somebody else's home and you're their guest. And there certainly are not a lot of women in Romanian law enforcement, so there's that. But there's also this expectation, we're the US government coming in to save everything. So you really struggle with saying no, or I'm not comfortable and things along those lines. So there were definitely moments where she and I were like, what are we thinking? But also they took us one day to lunch somewhere. I'm
somewhere being the operative term there.
I have no idea where we were. But whoever he was some big builder, I think, within the government, code word for he's a mob boss. And they sit us, he wants to show us around this industrial plant as if there's anything that matters case-wise to Adrienne and I. And then he sits us down, in his private lunch area, and it's all of this caviar, essentially homemade moonshine. And she and I are like, we do not drink, during the day, much less at work. And, we get this, oh, you're going to offend them if you don't do it. Needless to say, they sent us home with bottles of homemade moonshine or alcohol or whatever it is, which I thought for sure TSA was going to take from us. They did not. And it has sat at the house for so long now, the cork is beginning to disintegrate, and I'm afraid to open it because I think it's going to cause an explosion in the house. I mean, it looks like water. It is clearly not water.
The person that was driving us to this somewhere lunch location, again, it was like a gravel road along train tracks with the factory on the other side, and you see these like large electrical poles. We're in the backseat of a Porsche, and I remember looking at Melissa like, this is it. This is the end. We are literally driving to, this is our last meal. This is the last supper we're going to have. And we didn't even have a chance to get our eclair that we were dying to have in Bucharest if we could have gotten home that night. I thought for sure we were going to die.
Yeah.
As it turns out, it ended up being a lovely meal. We couldn't speak to anyone but each other because we couldn't speak the language, but it was lovely. And we went home with moonshine.
So I think we probably have time for one more story. Can you guys tell us a little bit about Kouri Richins?
Yeah. She was just, trial just happened within the last probably, 6 weeks. Maybe even less. So yeah, she was just adjudicated successfully, was found guilty. The murder of her husband, Eric Richins. So this case had come to us soon after. So Kouri Richins essentially out in Utah, mom of 3 boys. Her husband, Eric, had died. The initial indication was Eric died as a result of a fentanyl overdose. Kouri then went on the circuit with this book that she had written about, grief. And it's basically, a children's book about grief. And that is not, in fact, what happened. What happened is Kouri laced probably the drink she gave him that night with fentanyl, and Eric overdosed as a result of that and died. And so just, I think in March was the trial, and she was successfully prosecuted for that. So, really good case. We went out to Utah twice. We went out once to provide assistance to the locals and, the sheriff's office and the prosecutor's office in terms of a prosecutorial strategy. And then I retired in December, and 2 of my former colleagues who had been on the case with me initially went out for the trial to provide some assistance, because there was a thought at one point that Kouri was going to testify on her own behalf. So they had gone out when they basically went out right when prosecution rested, and then defense put on no defense.
Going back to the first case you talked about, and the couple stayed married for 7 years after things. This guy, when I looked into it, he had been poisoned at least once before this.
Correct.
And was even telling family members that he thought that she was trying to kill him, and still stayed with her until she did kill him.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there's some indication that Eric was definitely getting ready to leave her. But it was a very interesting case. And part of what we had done when we went out there for the prosecutorial strategy is to try to help them look at this a little bit differently, to the point that Adrienne made before. Women are just, we don't commit violence. Nobody thinks that we're ever capable of it. So I think part of what the prosecution had sort of gotten their head wrapped around was, what do we have going on here? Where, of course, our response is, hey, this is just a standard homicide. You just have a victim who is a male and a perpetrator who is a female, which is a little different than normal. But we talked them through utilizing the framework of the pathway to violence, which is often utilized in targeted acts of violence. So, school shooters, mass attacks, things like that, very well researched. We sort of articulated to them that is a good framework to look at this, because to Eric's point, you can sort of show Kouri's behavior along the pathway. And when you talk about the pathway, you kind of talk about planning and preparation, breach, and then your attack. To Eric's point, when she gave him a fentanyl-laced sandwich on Valentine's Day, that was very much a breach at that point in time. So it was a good opportunity to use a different framework for the jury than what is sort of typically used.
Right. And you deal with that cycle of violence too. And in this one, the genders are reversed, but it's really foreign to a lot of people, especially most jurors, of like, no, wait a second. Why would he stay with her if that was a real risk?
Sure.
There's no way you go through all this terrible stuff and you're still together. So it's just so unrelatable to some people, but it's just a gradual build, that domestic violence cycle of violence that gets to a point of like, you're still with them and people don't understand why.
Yeah. It's also interesting. And I imagine my former colleagues will probably use it, but like great 911 call, great body worn camera footage that they could play for the jury, which I think made it pretty clear to the jury what was going on, female or not. I think you could pretty easily see her guilt, but still she was adamant to the end that she did not do this. So it was great to see that Summit County was able to win. I mean, I think the jury came back in maybe 3 to 4 hours. So it was good.
They needed to eat lunch.
Yeah.
Never underestimate when a case is called in proximity to lunchtime and the quality of the plea offer.
Yeah.
Now that you guys are out of this unit and you're doing your own thing, what does that look like?
It's hard. Definitely hard, because we're used to doing the same thing day in and day out, even though the cases look different. We're used to doing the same thing day in and day out within the same organization. And now it's, I may be working for a law firm representing a plaintiff in a child abuse case today, and I may be doing a presentation at the U.S. Marine Corps tomorrow. And, you're kind of bouncing all over the place, and the pressure is different. Now I'm not representing my agency. I'm now representing myself. And that transition is a little difficult. The other thing I found very difficult is I don't have a team anymore, right? I used to be able to go into a room, I have a case in front of me and say, here's what I'm seeing. check me on that and see if I've missed something. And Melissa would say, hey, well, I saw this. What do you think about that? I don't have that anymore. It's me. Because in many of the cases I work on in the private sector and civil cases, I'm signing a non-disclosure agreement. So I can't call Melissa and say, hey, let me tell you about this case and try to figure out what's going on. I got to figure it out myself. And that was, I think, to me, one of the hardest transitions is I'm now a solo practitioner. So it's made it very difficult.
Yeah, I agree. It's also, sometimes you're hired by a firm that just wants something done, even if it's not done the right way. And that sometimes can be a little frustrating. They don't always want to hear best practices or what makes the most sense. It's more of the I'm paying for you and you're going to go do what I tell you to do. So, it's not always great. That being said, it is definitely nice to be out of that consistent world and begin to really, truly decompress and begin to sort of heal from some of the things that we saw and did. I don't know that, you'll never forget those things. You can still hear, when Adrienne talks about the Khaleesi case, like you can still hear that emotion behind it. It matters, but you still have more time and distance to do some other things and still make a difference. So, slowly but surely, those are the things that she and I are doing, trying to find other ways to make small impacts within our communities in some capacity.
What would you two attribute to being able to handle these cases, process these cases, and then just come home and have dinner with your family like a normal night? Or maybe you don't. I don't know.
Oh, there's so much. Truly baggage. But I would say that the beauty of working at the BAU and really in law enforcement generally is nothing is done alone. And so everything is done. It's a team sport. And that for sure is the case with the working at the BAU. Everything is done really as a team. So there's no solo success in that job. And even, working crimes against children really for 20 years, it's been my entire career. It's been the people that I work with that really become family that keep you going because, you look at trauma all day, every day and horrific things that you'll never forget, but you have to be able to process those in your own way. And like you said earlier, Ryan, it's not like you can walk into a party and start talking about these things. And so we have to be able to speak to people who can understand it, still laugh with us, pick up the weird things that happen in the middle of the case that no one else would notice because they'd be too busy grieving whatever had happened. But that's just how we cope and get through it. And then, exercise, spending time with our family, doing mundane things, going grocery shopping, things like that become pleasurable because you're not looking at horrors, you're not looking at trauma.
Yeah, I agree with Adrienne. I think the operational tempo, the pace is probably unmatched in any other organization. And you can't ever unsee, the things that are there. So there is certainly a baggage, but I think we all have some very deep seated sarcasm and just really weird sense of humor. And we get it. You find one or two or three other people within the unit who understand and you can sort of have those pulse checks with, but it's almost like severance in some ways. You just find a way to set that aside. And I said to somebody the other day, I joined a book club. Nobody thinks I'm interesting. And it's great. Like nobody wants to know what happened at BAU. Nobody wants to ask me any cases. Nobody cares what I did. They don't think I'm interesting. And that's fantastic because I think sometimes you go, to a party with your friends who are in other sects of life and they're like, oh my gosh, this is our friend, meet Adrienne. She's a criminal profiler. And then every head in the room turns to you and everybody wants to talk to you. And you're kind of like, I don't want to be that person. I just want to be left alone. Or to Adrienne's point, like I want to go grocery shopping and not rethink or, relive what has gone on. But you find ways to cope and have that resilience. And a lot of it is having some good, friends to have brunch with, like Adrienne and I did a few weeks ago. So that's what makes all the difference.
We have a running quote from a firefighter that was on the show, and he wrote a book as well, but he put this in there. Don't ever ask a firefighter what's the worst thing you've ever seen. Like it just kind of takes you back to that you're literally just dragging all this shit up in this person's head right there, right on the spot.
Yeah, for sure.
Exactly.
For sure. Yeah. But we've got, we've got good support systems, good friends who, understand that some days you just don't want to ask me how my day was. Mm-hmm. It's as simple as that. And, sometimes I eat my feelings. So there's a lot of chocolate scattered around the house.
Yes. Ice cream. Ice cream is an absolute necessity, and coffee.
Yes.
So that's the impact on your mental health. What about your personal life? Has being in the law enforcement career affected your personal life? And your daughter's just at college now, right, Melissa?
So I've got one in college and one is getting ready to go to college. But, I do tell the story, and I think Adrienne has heard this before. When the oldest was at, the local elementary school, Jeremy and I got called in because it was like, talk about, what the things that make you scared. And essentially it's supposed to be about like starting school. And she writes, I'm afraid of the masked guy breaking in through the window, basically raping my mom and killing everybody. So they called Jeremy and I in, and we're like, okay, so contextually, he's a homicide detective. Like, this is what I do. I mean, there was a day that somebody came to the house to install a ceiling fan, and we've got, a Barbie duct taped to the bedpost. And I'm like, Jiminy Christmas. Like,
I have a jar of Barbie dolls on my desk.
Right. Like the things that an outside observer would think if they were to ever enter the house is definitely that things aren't right in this house. I mean, the kids have heard a lot. They've said a lot. Yes. So to Adrienne's point, I mean.
Adrienne, anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just think that it's, once the rose-colored glasses have come off, it's hard to put them back on. And so really every decision you make, everything that you do, somehow our jobs weigh in on that, whether it's where I'm going to sit in a restaurant, always knowing where the exit is, telling my kids if something happens, here's where you're going to leave, just awareness of our surroundings. And then my inability to stop analyzing everyday people that I run into in public, whether it's the banker that's helping me out with something or the clerk at the grocery store. I'm looking at the tattoos. I'm asking questions about the tattoos. I'm looking at bumper stickers. My daughter got furious with me the other day because I was at a local sporting facility, and there was a car with literally 50 bumper stickers on the back. And I pull out my phone and I start snapping photos of the car all over the place. And she's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm taking photos. This is amazing for indirect personality assessment. Look at all these stickers. This tells a lot about the person." And she's like, "You are embarrassing me. There are people looking at you." Of course, Melissa knows, well, I could care less than anyone's looking at me. So those sorts of things, I don't at this point yet know how to turn off. Maybe when I'm in the home someday.
I'd hate for you to see the back of my ATV. It's nothing but stickers of 90s and 2000 movies and snarky quotes.
We'll have all kinds of things to say about you.
Yes.
But to Adrienne's point, I mean, I remember when, based on a case that Jeremy had because he did crimes against children for a time before, he retired from that job and took his current one. But it was like, the kids will not play piano. The kids will not, play baseball, because you consistently had offenders that sort of fit into this niche. So to Adrienne's point, it's like, nope, we just had a case that our offender was a piano teacher. You will not do piano unless I sit in the room with you while you take your piano lesson. And I'm sure the piano teacher is like, who is this weird helicopter mom? And I'm like, well, if you knew what I did for a living, you would understand why I'm not. No, everybody to me is in the no zone until you work your way the other way, versus having this sense that like everybody's good. Nope, everybody's bad until they prove otherwise. So you definitely don't want me on a jury.
Yeah. I mean, with the cases I've had to handle, my kids are never doing a sleepover ever.
Sure.
And phone, social media, good luck. You're going to be the kid that's so ticked off that they're the only one that doesn't have this equipment or this latest game or whatever, because I'm just so paranoid. Yeah.
Yeah. The oldest was not allowed to have social media until she committed to a college. She was not amused.
Okay. Well, thanks again. Ryan, is there anything you want to plug?
My new memoir, which comes out in a few months, is for sale anywhere books can be purchased. You can get it at simonschuster.com. Any of the places. It's called 12 Guys Walk Into a Kitchen. My previous novel, The Party, is also for sale on the internet, and I will be on the road throughout America later this year. The next date is the Comedy Cellar in Las Vegas. I'm doing a week in June.
Should have been in Denver on Friday.
I should be, but I'm not. We moved it to coincide with the book.
Yeah, and if you want details on any of those dates, go to ryanconnorcomedy.com.
Thank you.
So I think that's going to do it for this episode. Thanks, everybody, and see you next time.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Be safe.
Music for Baggage provided by Quincy Ledbetter. You can find his stuff at qledbetter.com. Graphics provided by Megan Weaver. You can find her at meganweaverart.com. Special thanks to our premium members for their support. You can become a premium member by clicking subscribe in your Apple Podcast app or by visiting thebaggagepodcast.com/support to sign up or to gift a membership to someone. A percentage of all proceeds go to charity. If you have any questions, comments, or a good story to share, please email us at thebaggagepodcast@gmail.com.